Welcome to the course Introduction to Psychology. Lesson 1 is entitled The Nature of Psychology. In traversing the roadmap of this course, Lesson 1 deals with the nature of psychology. Lesson 2 deals with neurological basis of behavior, which talks about the function of the nervous system and the endocrine system and its relation to behavior. Lesson 3, we are going to deal with different theories of human development. Lesson 4, sensation and perception. Lesson 5, we are going to discuss consciousness and its altered states, while lesson 6 will focus on the different theories of learning. Lesson 7 focus on memory, 8 thinking, 9 emotion, 10 personality, 11 health, stress and coping, 12 abnormal psychology but only the basic, and 13 social psychology. We are going to deal with the basic concept as well because this is just introduction to psychology. Detailed description of this course will be discussed in your major subjects. In Lesson 1, we are going to define psychology, look at the historical background of psychology, to define the school of thought, approaches, perspective, and specialization of psychology, and to differentiate the different methods used in psychological research. Before we define psychology, there are some misconceptions about psychology that we need to understand. First, psychology is mysterious. According to others, psychology is something mysterious, but in reality, there is nothing mysterious about psychology because psychology is part of science, therefore it has to pass through scientific process. Another misconception about psychology is that psychology is a common sense. According to others, it's just a common sense. Well, perhaps before it is called folk psychology, but at present, psychology could not be considered as just a common sense because many psychological principles are the result of rigorous researches conducted by psychologists presented by facts and evidences. So psychology is not just a common sense, it is not opinion based because we are guided by different theories which are the foundations of psychological principles. Another misconception about psychology is that psychology is parascience. So example of parascience, understanding the personality of the individual by the position of the stars, and it's called astrology. Understanding the personality of the individual by the line of the palms, which is called palmistry. Understanding the personality of the individual by the shape of the skull, and it's called nephrology. And understanding the personality of the individual by the stroke of the handwriting, graphology. Graphology is being practiced in other countries and it is already accepted. They use that as a form of assessment in industrial setting in which the applicants are asked to write an essay and then they are going to interpret the personality of that applicant if it's suited for the position he is applying for. But here in the Philippines, I think there is a requirement before you conduct this graphology, and it seems that it requires certification or a license to administer or facilitate graphology. Now, let us define psychology. Psychology is the scientific study of human behavior and mental processes. But what do we mean by behavior? Before we define behavior, let us first define some concepts that are related to the term behavior. The first one is character. Character is defined as our moral nature. This is ugali in Filipino. For example, if you're going to transfer to another school, there is a requirement which is called Certificate of Good Moral Character. Okay? So, ito yung nagpapatunay na ikaw ay may mabuting pag-uugali. Next is personality. Personality etymologically is persona, which means mask, worn by Roman actors to portray characters in Greek drama. So this persona or mask is used to project a role or false appearance that is not the real self, rather that is just the character that they portray in Greek drama. Another description of personality is that presently it is defined as individuals' unique pattern of thoughts, feelings, and actions people display over time and across situation, and that distinguish individuals from each other. Okay, so let's analyze things first. Before, speaking of personality, it has something to do with a false appearance. That is not the real you. But there was an evolution of the definition. Why? Because at present, speaking of personality, it represents who you really are, your unique characteristic which distinguish you from another individual. Now, here's another as a definition of personality, which refers to the sum total characteristics or qualities of an individual. It contains several aspects: the physical, mental, social, emotional, moral, and spiritual. However, for laymen, they usually relate personality only to the physical aspect. Why? Because the term personality is usually being used as part of the criteria in a contest with pleasing personality. That's why perhaps they only refer personality to the pleasing physical characteristics. But speaking of personality, since it is the sum total characteristics or qualities of the individual, our mental aspect also reflects our personality. Mental, let's say a person has an above average or superior intelligence, average intelligence or below average intelligence. There are people who are fast learner, slow learner. That also represents your personality. Social, if you are introverted type, if you are extroverted type or ambivert type of individual. Emotional, if you are easily get irritated, if you are patient. Moral, if your actions are moral or unrightful, that also represents your personality. Spiritual, if you have this good relationship to God, and if you have this fear of if you have this faith and fear of God, then probably it could also represent your personality. So all in all, these all aspects represents our personality. Personality in Filipino is pagkatao. Ito yung kabuuan ng ating pagkatao. Now, let's proceed to another term, which is trait. It refers to specific feature, quality, or characteristics of an individual. So how are we going to differentiate trait from personality? Kanina, yung personality, ang sabi natin, general description. So, sum total characteristics. It cannot stand alone. But when we say trait, it pertains to the specific characteristic. It pertains to the specific feature. So, therefore, personality is composed of several traits. Okay, so personality as general description, trait is specific. So that's why in Filipino we call this katangian. Okay, sinisingle out natin. Now, how about attitude? Attitude is the way we respond to any given situation. It could be behavioral, action. It could be evaluative, cognitive, okay? And it could be emotional. So it could be favorable, unfavorable. Let's give an example. Behavioral. Let's say for instance, inutusan ka ng nanay mo, sumunod ka, then that is your attitude. May action. Binati ka ng friend mo and then nag-response ka sa kanya, then that is your attitude. Okay? How about sa cognitive? May tinanong sa'yo, sinagot mo, which do you prefer, green or white? Sumagot ka ng white, then that is your attitude. Okay? So, what else? Emotion. In love siya sa'yo, you are not in love with him, then that is your attitude because that is the way you respond to any given situation. Now, therefore, we cannot say that attitude as merely ugali kasi yung ugali, we refer that to character. So, in attitude, we cannot single out a Filipino term for this because it could be behavioral, it could be cognitive, it could be emotional. Okay? So, pwedeng sa loobin, yung response po pwede rin pagtugon or pwede rin na pakikitungo. Okay? So, as long as it describes behavioral, mental, and emotional aspects of the individual, that represents attitude. Now, let us define behavior. Dito talaga tayo interested sa behavior kasi from the definition of psychology that it is the scientific study of human behavior and mental processes. So, according to the father of behaviorism, John B. Watson, behavior refers to all activities which can be observed objectively. So, entire activity, all acts or activities of an individual. Let us give examples of behavior. We can say crying is behavior, being shy, shouting is behavior. Another examples are cooking, playing, swimming. Now, you may get confused in what way that cooking, playing, and swimming are behavior. Well, perhaps the thing that comes only to your mind is speaking of behavior are those initial terms that we have discussed, the trait, the character, personality, and attitude. They can be behavior as long as they can be observed. Ibig sabihin, hindi lang dun tumutukoy ang behavior. Because based on our definition, pag sinabing behavior, all activities, all acts or activities of the individual which can be observed objectively. There are two types of behavior. The first one is extrinsic or overt behavior. This behavior can be observed by others. Something that can be observed by others such as singing, shouting, mannerism, and the other one is intrinsic or covert behavior. Behavior which can be observed only by the person who experiences it. Example for this is being hungry. If you are hungry, others wouldn't know that you are hungry. Increase in pulse rate or increase in heartbeat are also examples of intrinsic or covert behavior. The goals of psychology or psychological research are to describe what is happening, to explain and understand why it is happening, to predict when will it happen again, and to control behavior. So, in this manner, this should always be in proper order. We should always first describe behavior before we can explain and understand. And then, that's the time na we could already predict and control behavior. Behavior that are being controlled are usually the unfavorable behavior. So, what do we mean by sociological, biological, or psychological? When we say sociological cause of behavior, ang cause ng behavior ay nanggagaling sa environment or from other person. How about ang biological? Ang cause ng behavior has something to do with ourself over which we cannot control. Why? Because it's already there. It's part of our body system. And psychological cause of behavior also has something to do with ourselves, but by this time, we have the ability to control it. So, anong ibig sabihin nito? We should not come up, okay, easily to a conclusion. Pag halimbawang nakita natin ang isang behavior ng tao, being shy, being quiet, we should not easily come up to a conclusion that this person is snob or medyo masungit, something like that. Why? Because there are several reasons as basis for behavior. Let's say for instance sociological. Suppose our behavior is crying. Example ng sociological cause of behavior po pwedeng pinagalitan siya ng ibang tao kaya siya umiiyak. Biological po pwedeng nasaktan siya physically kaya siya umiiyak. Psychological po pwedeng hindi niya nakuha yung gusto niya kaya siya umiiyak. Now, how about etymological definition of psychology? It is derived from the two Greek words psyche and logos. Psyche, which means mind or soul, and logos, which means study. So, therefore, literally, it refers to the study of mind or soul. Okay, so let's have a short background of the history of psychology. There is what we call demonology. It is the term which refers to the idea that abnormal behavior is caused by supernatural forces, evil spirit, and witchcraft. Noong unang panahon, class, meron ng mentally ill individual, meron ng abnormal behavior, and they associate that sickness to due to evil spirit, witchcraft. That's why they also have their own way of therapy or treatment. One of the method they use is trephining. It is an operation where stone instruments were used to chip a hole in the circular portion of the skull in order for the body spirit to escape. And as you can see in the figure, meron daw mga patient before na nakasurvive sa operation. Okay, so this is one of the methods they use as a therapy for those with suffering from abnormal behavior. Another method is exorcism. Exorcism involves prayer, noise making, beating, and others. Actually, at present, exorcism is still applied, but in the case of abnormal behavior, that is a different issue as compared to exorcism practice. Another one is others are being tortured or hung. Yung iba sinusunog pa ng buhay. Okay? Ganon ang kanilang paniniwala nung araw. By the 15th to 16th century, there was a hospital established called asylum. All mentally ill individuals were confined in that hospital. In 1792, Philip Pinel said, "Sick mind must be treated humanely." So mapapansin natin dito, unti-unti na nagkakaroon ng understanding with regards to the cases of mentally ill individual. So dahil sinabi niya na sick mind, ibig sabihin this condition is not correlated with evil spirit or witchcraft. Rather, there is something wrong with their mind. And at present, there are several institutions, private and public, who give assistance to the patient with psychological or psychiatric condition. Psychology rooted from philosophy. One of the basic statements by Socrates relevant to psychology is that an unexamined life is not worth living. who is then the father of traditional psychology? He wrote the book The Anima, which talks about mind-body relationship. It was Aristotle. There are two views with regards to understanding behavior or ideas, the nativist and the empiricist point of view. The nativist was introduced by René Descartes, Plato. They believed that innate ideas already exist at birth. It's already inborn. According to them, man is born with all necessary potential to become functional and complete, while empiricists by John Locke, George Berkeley, and David Hume believed that at birth, our mind is like a tabula rasa, a blank slate, that the moment we deal with the environment through the use of our senses, that's the time we acquire knowledge. So, ibig sabihin, para sa kanila, yung ideas natin ngayon, ang knowledge and behavior are taken from the environment, which we learn through the use of our senses. Okay, pioneer psychologist, who is the father of modern psychology, he established the first psychological laboratory in Leipzig, Germany in 1879. It was Wilhelm Wundt. Kaya naging science yung psychology because of this operation in the laboratory as established by Wilhelm Wundt. Another known psychologist was Granville Stanley Hall, the person who established the psychological laboratory in the US, specifically at Johns Hopkins University. In the Philippines, we have Father Angel de Blas, who established the first experimental psychological laboratory at UST in 1938. Next, we have Raymond Cattell. He developed a standardized test called 16PF or 16 personality factor. Sa dinami-dami ng coverage ng personality, in order to measure personality, he only focused on the 16 factors of personality. Next, we have Sir Francis Galton, who established the psychological laboratory in London, became interested in studying individual differences. So, ibig sabihin, naging global na ang pag-aaral ng psychology from different countries. In the Philippines, we consider Virgilio Enriquez as the father of Filipino psychology or ama ng psikolohiyang Pilipino. Marami siyang na-contribute na psychological concept that is relevant for applied or applicable for Filipinos. Usually kasi, ang karamihan ng mga concept ay westernized, galing sa US and from other countries, but Virgilio Enriquez introduced ang pagkatao at iba't ibang mga konsepto na tumutukoy o nagdi-describe sa behavior ng isang Filipino. Ang psychology ay sinimulang pag-aralan as early as 17th century dito sa Pilipinas from San Carlos University of Cebu and UST in Manila. Now let us proceed with the school of thought of psychology. When we say school of thought, it deals with the different discipline in psychology. Isa lang ang psychology pero merong iba't ibang paliwanag as the focus or concentration of psychology, and the first one is structuralism. Structuralism was first studied by Edward B. Titchener. Estudyante siya ni Wilhelm Wundt together with the physicist Hermann von Helmholtz. Structuralism deals with the study of elements that form the structure of the mind. They try to break down conscious experience into basic elements through the method used, introspection. Introspection is defined as self-analysis of the conscious mental experience. So, paano ito? Yung client, papahigain sa couch para maging relax. Sometimes gumagamit sila ng metronome para makapag-concentrate si client. And what they will do is to ask the client anything about himself, and they will record all the experiences, memories, feeling at that particular moment. And then pagsasama-samahin, and in the end, eventually, they would conclude that that is the content of your mind, and that should be the focus of psychology, kung ano yung content ng mind. Let us give an example. Halimbawa, class, the component of water, it includes 2 hydrogen atom and 1 oxygen. Pwede nating sabihin na yung mga elements na yun, ito yung mga pinagsama-sama experiences, memories, feelings, and so on, na kapag nagsama-sama, yun ay tinatawag natin na magpo-form siya ng water, H2O. Now, same thing with the structuralism. Pag pinagsama-sama daw natin yung content ng mind, then that forms the psychology. Whatever is there in the content of your mind, then the approach is called structuralism. But another group deviated from structuralism. They formed another school of thought which they call functionalism. This was introduced by the U.S. Father of psychology, William James. Functionalism emphasized that psychology must deal with the function of consciousness rather than with structure or content. So, sinasabi dito, importante ang content, importante ang structure, pero meron pang mas importante sa structure at content. Ano yun? Function. Kailangan nagpa-function. Particularly concerned with the mental processes of learning, perception, memory, and motivation as a way of helping the individual function in the real world and for him to be able to adapt to his environment. Now, ibig sabihin, for them, structure is not enough, content is not enough, kailangan it has to be functional. So siguro, to give an example, we can apply this to object and we can apply this to human being as well. Halimbawa, sa object, meron kang aircon, kompleto ng parts, pero hindi naman siya gumagana, then it's useless. Okay? It doesn't serve its purpose. Now, same thing with functionalism. Merong structure, merong content, pero kung hindi naman na-apply, kung ano man yung content na yon, so it would be worthless. Now, human being, merong perception, merong learning, merong memory, dapat ina-apply. Let's say, for instance, you learned something, you graduated in college, and therefore you are expected to apply those learning later in your life by having a good job. Another school of thought is Gestalt, which refers to the pattern of configuration or a good form or good figure. It has a maxim that the whole is greater than the sum of its part. So, to simplify, mas malaki daw or greater ang whole than the sum of its part. Let's say, for instance, yung one whole supposedly is equivalent to 4 1/4. Pero sa Gestalt, yung one whole is greater than the sum of its part. Now, perhaps we can relate this to synergy, cooperation. Let's give an example. Kapag ang parts ng ballpen pinaghiwa-hiwalay, you can still use one part for writing but you will not be comfortable. Compared to if you're going to assembled the ball pen in its original form, then it will serve its purpose. It will be comfortable for us to use that ball pen. Now, same thing with human being. Okay? So, in a group, perhaps kapag mag-isa ka lang, parang it's difficult for you to achieve what you would like to achieve. But if there is a genuine support coming from the group member, then it would be better to achieve the team goals. So another example is the broomstick. If we are going to use only one stick, then it's difficult for us to clean the backyard. But if we're going to make use of the the broomstick altogether, then it would be comfortable for us to use that for sweeping. Now, how does it become greater? Greater because if you can think of any other purpose of ballpen aside from writing, if you can think of any other purpose of the broomstick aside from sweeping, then it becomes greater. Another school of thought is psychoanalysis by Sigmund Freud. According to him, behavior is established by unconscious mind. Karamihan sa behavior natin is guided by unconscious mind. He believed in the idea of sex instinct. Actually, it's not only sex instinct but also aggressive instinct. Meron daw tayong instinct which drives our behavior toward pleasure and toward aggressiveness. He also believed that early life experiences is related to present character or personality. Na kung ano man yung naging experience mo nung bata ka ay may kinalaman kung ano ang iyong personality at present. Mannerism for him is a manifestation of undesirable experiences. Unknowingly na babait mo na pala yung finger mo, and sabi ni Sigmund Freud, may reason yan. You are feeling uncomfortable at the moment, and by doing that, you feel satisfied, napapacify ka. He used different techniques like hypnosis, dream analysis, free association, and transference, but he did not become successful in terms of the method of hypnosis. Dream analysis, nag-a-analyze siya ng dream kasi according to him, he defined dream as wish fulfillment activities. Ibig sabihin kung ano daw yung mga bagay na gustong-gusto mong makuha in real life na hindi mo makuha usually nagmamanifest sa dream. And then yung free association, this is just like talk therapy. Walang hadlang. Sabihin mo kung ano yung mga gusto mong sabihin. Kasi in real life may restrictions Bawal sumigaw, bawal magmura, bawal magalit. So for free association, binibigyan ka ng pagkakataon na gawin lahat ng nasabihin kung ano yung mga gusto mong sabihin. Just talk it out para lumabas from your unconscious mind. And transference, the tendency to have a relationship yung client dun sa therapist. Perhaps hindi naman talaga relationship but the tendency, okay, na ma-associate niya yung therapist as part of his significant others. The last school of thought is behaviorism by John B. Watson. Behavior, as we defined, is something that can be observed objectively. It is the result of learning and not instinct. Sabi ni Watson, hindi ako naniniwala dyan sa instinct na yan kasi hindi ko yan nakikita. I would rather believe to something that I could actually see or observe. So, it is study psychology based on overt behavior. Nagyabang pa si Watson, sabi niya, bigyan mo ko ng 100 infant and I will make them whatever I want them to be in the future. Pwedeng maging attorney, lawyer, nurse, beggar, merchant. So, ang ibig lang sabihin nito, that our behavior can be modified. That is, according to Watson. Let us now proceed with the perspective or approaches in psychology. Perspective or approaches in psychology explain why people behave that way. Bakit ganun ang behavior niya? Let's have the first one, neurobiological perspective. It explains that the nervous system and the endocrine system have much impact to behavior. So, if you can still remember, speaking of nervous system, it has something to do with the function of our brain, the spinal cord, and the neuron. While endocrine system has something to do with the functions of our glands and hormones. So, let's give an example. Suppose, sumasakit ang tiyan ko. What can we say about this? Perhaps for laymen, they would say that your stomach ache because you are hungry. But for neurobiological perspective, they have different way to explain it. Um, 'Di ba, ang being hungry is behavior and that is intrinsic behavior. Paano pinaliwanag ng neurobiological perspective? Sumasakit yun because it is the dictate of our brain to your stomach which makes it grow. So there is the function of the brain and the neuron. Meron kasing mga cases class like bulimia nervosa, malakas kumain, anorexia nervosa, walang ganang kumain. So, ang paliwanag ng neurobiological perspective kasi may kinalaman yun dun sa function ng brain. Okay, pinapagana daw silang kumain or hindi sila pinapaganang kumain. The function of the brain physically. Another example for the nervous system, let's say for instance, nagkaroon ng accident na damage one part of the brain na naging reason kung bakit nagkaroon ng amnesia yung isang tao. So physically, na-damage kasi yung part that is responsible for memory. That is why. Now, how about endocrine system? Endocrine system class, may kinalaman siya sa hormone. Halimbawa, pag nagkakaroon ng hormonal imbalance, kapag may menstruation, pregnant, menopausal period, kaya sometimes the woman gets more irritated because that hormone may be associated with the mood of the woman. And another example, the reason perhaps why a person have difficulty sleeping at night kasi nakukulangan siya ng hormone that is responsible for sleep-wake cycle. Another perspective is behavioral perspective. There is a formula S and R which represent S for stimulus and R for response. Kung ano daw yung stimulus, siya ang response. It adheres to the belief that psychology should focus on overt, observable behavior and its relationship to an event that can be predicted and measured objectively. So, halimbawa, ang behavior natin ay eating. The question is, bakit tayo kumakain? So, kung ang sagot ng layman, because we are hungry, you are hungry, for behavioral perspective, they have different way of explaining it. Sabi nila, kaya raw tayo kumakain because there is a presence of the food. And that presence of the food, yun yung i-encourage sa atin in order to eat the food. Now, let's have another example. So, yung example natin na yun is stimulus, food, ang response ay eating. Okay, another example. Ang sabi ni teacher, class, you attend the meeting and I will give you 10 points incentive. So, regardless if whether you are interested or not to attend the meeting, sabi ng behavioral, a-attend yan because of the incentive points. So, yung incentive, yun yung stimulus, yung response, a-attend ng meeting. Another way of explaining behavior is the cognitive perspective. Speaking of cognitive, when we say cognitive, it refers to the mental process. Ito yung perception, memory, learning, thinking, and like that. Now, if you may notice, the formula already changed. A while ago, for behavioral, it's only S and R. But by this time, it become SOR. S, again, stands for stimulus. O stands for organism, which refers to the human being. And R represents response. Now, let's have an example. Kunin natin yung example natin na ginamit sa neurobiological, yung masakit ang tiyan, pero hindi daw nagugutom ang paliwanag ng neurobiological kasi ang paliwanag nila, it's because it is the function of the brain. Sa behavioral naman, bakit tayo kumakain? According to them, hindi dahil sa nagugutom tayo, kundi there is a presence of the food. dito naman sa cognitive perspective, it seems that they deviate with the point of view of the behavioral. Ang sabi ng cognitive, hindi dahilan na present yung food kaya tayo kakain. We are human being. So, since we are human being, we have the brain and we have the capacity first to think before we act or react to a certain situation. Kasi, halimbawa, kahit daw na may presence ng food, it will still depend on the situation. Kahit daw may presence ng food, halimbawa, kung hindi naman siya nagugutom, hindi siya kakain. So, nag-iisip muna, may pambili ba ako? Wala pa akong pambili. Gusto ko bang kumain? Ayaw ko bang kumain? So, meaning to say, before we react to a particular situation, we tend to think about it first. So, halimbawa, yung example natin kanina, class, bigyan ko kayo ng 10 points, attend kayo sa meeting. Ang sabi ng cognitive perspective, not necessary na merong 10 points ay a-attend sa meeting. What if ang gusto niya ay 15 points, 20 points, or baka meron siyang personal matter na kailangan i-attend. So, not necessary giving up 10 points, automatic a-attend sa meeting. So, in short, ang ibig lang sabihin nito, as human being, we use our mind before we come up to a decision or action. The fourth perspective is the psychodynamic perspective by Sigmund Freud. According to him, there are three structures of the mind: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is the first structure to develop. Tinatawag siya na pleasure principle kasi para siyang bata, child state. Kung ano yung gusto niya immediately na ma-achieve. And then, yung ego naman, ito yung reality principle. Tinatawag din siya na adult state kasi kung mag-isip siya, analytic. Si superego naman, ito naman yung moral principle. Ito yung ating conscience na parang parent kasi siya yung nagsasabi kung ano yung mga dapat natin gawin or hindi natin dapat gawin. So, kung na-experience din yung class na it seems you are talking to yourself, especially when you are dealing with a dilemma, eto daw yung tatlo na nag-uusap-usap. So, let's give an example. Halimbawa, ang sabi ni Id, gusto kong manood ng telenovela mamayang gabi. Ang sasabihin ni superego, huwag kang manood kasi unahin mo muna yung assignment mo. Ang sabi naman ni ego, well, pwede ka sigurong manood, but we should take proper time management. Matapos mo muna yung assignment mo, and then, para makapanood ka na. So, si ego, dinidelay niya lang ang gusto ng id. Tinitignan niya muna yung situation, if it's appropriate, bago niya ibigay. So, ang nag-mediate dito sa id and superego is the ego. Another perspective is phenomenological or humanistic perspective. So ito, iba naman yung kanilang paliwanag why we behave that way. So according to them, it elevates the status of men from animals. They give emphasis on the concept of free will, which is defined as the capacity to make choices that will make a person realize his inner potential. So, tayo daw, kaya tayo nagbe-behave kasi we have the capacity to make decision. We have the capacity to realize the action that will help us to become a better individual. Another explanation is from social-cultural perspective. It is a combination of social and cultural psychology. So, kaya raw tayo nagbe-behave, it's because ano ba yung social psychology? It primarily focus on the study of group dynamics, social roles, behaviors as affected by norms or interpersonal relationship. So sometimes ang behavior natin ay binabase natin kung ano yung appropriate sa society, kung ano yung ine-expect ng ibang tao sa atin. So interpersonal relationship. Now how about cultural psychology? Ito naman deals with the lifestyle as a product of cultural norms, values, and expectations. Kung ano yung mga ina-expect sa atin culturally, doon naka-base yung behavior natin. So, socio-cultural is a combination of the application of social and cultural psychology. So the last perspective is evolutionary perspective. Behavior is geared towards survival of the species. So why we behave that way? For them, it is because in order for us to survive. Let's give an example. Why are you studying? Because you would like to finish your studies. Why do you want to finish your studies? Because you would like to have a good job someday. Why do you want to have a good job someday? In order for me to earn for a living. Why do you want to earn something for a living? Eventually, it boils down to a reason that everyone behave in order for us to survive. And that's the main point of evolutionary perspective. So these are some of the specializations in psychology. Maraming specialization in psychology, but these are just overview. We have biopsychology, clinical, cognitive, community, comparative, consumer, counseling, cultural. Halimbawa sa engineering, marami ding field yung engineering, chemical engineering, electrical engineering, civil engineering. So, ang specialization ng psychology sobrang dami. Pero dito sa Pilipinas, medyo konti lang yung ina-apply. Meron tayo dito field or of study major in clinical psychology. We also have developmental psychology, educational. Sa Pilipinas, meron tayo niyan. I'm a graduate of education psychology in my master's degree, engineering, environmental, forensic, gender, and health psychology. In addition, we have industrial organizational. Ito yung mga those who are working in the human resources department. We also have learning, medical, paranormal, personality. School psychology is also available here in the Philippines. Meron tayong field of study in school psychology, sensation and perception, social and sports psychology. So here are the methods used in psychological research. First is naturalistic observation, when the researcher is trying to observe the behavior of the participant in a natural setting, their lifestyle, their culture. Survey questionnaire, ito yung ginagamitan ng form. Answerable by agree, disagree, and sometimes it requires personal information. Case study, phenomenological study, or qualitative type of study. Case study is a qualitative study which deals with understanding the background of the client by using psychological report. Okay, more of clinical approach in the field of psychology. Phenomenological is when the researcher is interested to know about the essence of the lived experience of the participant. Archivals are studying those things associated with the persons interested in that a researcher is interested to study about. Experimental, ito yung method which aims to know the effect, the cause and effect of a certain behavior, while correlational, it aims to study the relationship between two or more variables.